I wanted to go out on stage and say, hello, good evening. I have cancer. How are you doing? And it made me laugh maniacally in the shower. And I thought, oh my gosh, I don't know if I can do that. I don't want to offend people. And then I just thought, well, I'm not making fun of people. I'm trying to make light of my own, I'm trying to process my own situation.
Whether you're a patient, survivor, or caregiver, you don't have to walk the cancer journey alone. Let's leave the past behind and come into this present moment together to be educated, inspired, and enlightened. This is Mind, Body, Spirit, Cancer. Welcome to Mind, Body, Spirit, Cancer, a new podcast presented by the American Cancer Society. I'm your host, Pat Croce, and this week's guest is an incredibly talented stand-up comedian whose comedy specials and albums have earned her both Emmy and Grammy Award nominations. She's acted on both the big and small screens and has performed on stages around the world. And these days, you can hear her dish out advice as host of the Don't Ask Tig podcast. She's a New York Times bestselling author, mother of two, and breast cancer survivor. Please welcome Tig Notaro. Welcome, Tig. Great to have you on the show.
Thanks. Great to be here.
Now, before we get started, if you don't mind, if you would join me in just a simple moment of stillness. I have this Tibetan bell that I brought all the way from Tibet. And just one little simple, I'd like everyone just to rest, all of our community watching and listening to this, just rest your attention lovingly, gently on the sound of this bell. Well, Tig, that's the doorbell. That's the doorbell to this sacred space that you and I, as survivors, share with the cancer community. And I got to tell you, I go back maybe 20 years, and the only comedian, professional comedian that I knew was I did a show for Sony, and the producer who was in my ear the whole time was Vance DeGeneres. And so he was so witty, so funny. And I know they were brought up in New Orleans, and they must have some funky water down there because the two sister brother are unbelievable. Now, 20 years later, I've watched your specials and listened to you, and there's some kind of crazy wit. I want to know how you got this creative spirit. When did it start? How'd you grow up? Like, I don't know many comedians.
Yeah. Well, it's funny because, Ellen's family and my family were actually friends, for generations. And I didn't grow up knowing Ellen, but, she's like 10 or so years older than I am. I was just in Mississippi for Easter and for my stepfather's funeral. And I was telling my wife that I feel like people always wonder what's going on with the South and all of the, artists and comedians in that area. Like you said, is there something in the water? And I really had a moment when I was just down there thinking, what is going on here? Because something insane always happens. My family is certainly a bunch of characters, and I grew up around very funny people, wild, gregarious people, but always something insane happens. And I realized you just kind of have to just have your eyes open, and that's all that it takes. And then you will take in whatever insanity is going on. For example, at my stepfather's funeral, my brother fell into the grave. They forgot to put plywood under the green astroturf, and my brother fell in. And I immediately was like, oh my gosh, our whole family just, oh no. And then I thought, this must happen all the time. And then a second later, I thought, no, there's no way this happens all the time. And then I thought, well, now I have another story to tell. So I don't know what's going on with the South or my family, but it's endless stories.
Well, can you take us back to the characters where these endless stories began?
My parents,
You. No, where you really began with these characters.
I was just, like I said, always surrounded by funny character. I never knew though until I left home and brought friends or girlfriends back with me. That's when I realized, oh, maybe my life and family isn't completely normal. I don't know. I was a funny kid. I was a class clown. I was really into music and soccer and art and all of those kinds of things. And secretly, growing up, always wished that I could be a stand up comedian, but I didn't understand at all how to make that leap into
So
that.
no, so you really had a purpose. You really had a passion within you that to be a stand-up comedian.
Yeah, yeah. I didn't think I was ever going to pursue it because I didn't understand the path to something like that. It feels like going to the moon, or even harder. Like it feels like I could see a path of how you study and do what you have to do to go to the moon, but I didn't understand when I would watch HBO specials and they would say, "Please welcome Paula Poundstone." And a comedian would walk out into a sold out theater of like 3,000 people. I thought, how did she get to the theater? Like, how did she get booked there? How do people know who she is? I couldn't figure that out.
Well, I can't figure out the how you got where you are. So take me, what was the next step since you didn't know how they did it, somehow you figured it out. So take us on that journey.
Well, I my childhood friends that I grew up with, they moved out to Los Angeles to pursue TV and film. And we all kind of grew up together and moved around together based on whoever got into what school at whatever time in whatever town. And then when they graduated, they went to Los Angeles and I went with them. And in Los Angeles, when I opened the LA Weekly magazine, there were all sorts of open mic opportunities. And I just thought, well, I could try out this dream I've always had kind of under the radar. And I didn't have any intention of pursuing it as a career or for money, but I started doing open mics. And
So
then,
let me just stop you right there. So you went out LA without any purpose other than your friends were going out.
yeah,
And then you saw a newspaper an ad for an open mic, and from that awareness, something tickled you.
yeah, I started doing stand up 2 weeks after I landed in LA, and I've been doing it now for 26 years.
Where did the bits come from? Where did your stories come from? Your act?
My life, I just started writing material down and rehearsed it in my studio apartment a million times, and then I went out to a coffee shop and got on stage and have been doing that, like I said, 26 years or so.
Okay, so take us 26 years ago when you stepped on stage for the first time.
Hmm.
What did you feel?
Well, I felt nervous, and because I had been rehearsing by myself in my apartment, as odd as it may seem, I didn't account for laughs because I had been so used to talking to myself in the mirror. I was just talking to myself over and over and over in my mirror. And so, of course, nobody was laughing for those, moments alone. And so when I got on stage and I got laughs, it was very startling. And then I had to remind myself, oh, right, that's why I'm doing this. And, I'm sure it was kind of hit or miss, but at the time, I couldn't believe how well I did. And of course, if I saw a video of it now, I would be cringing. But it was enough to keep me going.
Were you courageous growing up?
I think so. I feel like I realized, especially in the past 11 years, that I take a lot of risks. And then it made me reflect on my life growing up. And I realized, oh, this isn't new for me. I took a lot of risks as a child, and they weren't as, they weren't streamlined, focused, positive risks when I was younger. But
Can
I
you
think,
share a risk that in the background you said wasn't a risk now that you think about it?
well, no, it was a risk. It was a risky risk where it was potentially, I could have been hurt terribly. I was taking a lot of, just doing a lot of, whether I was climbing on a roof or, swinging into a river or water skiing with alligators in Louisiana or speeding, just those kind of risks. Or dropping out of high school, which I did. Those were different kinds of risks. Whereas now I feel like, now that I know myself better, now that I have more confidence in who I am, my risks are very focused risks. And I know what I'm after with the risk that I take.
So you said something about a risk 11 years ago. What risk was that?
My diagnosis date was July 25th. And I would say one of the biggest risks that was life changing for me was, well, during the time that I was diagnosed with cancer, I'd also been diagnosed with this digestive uh, intestinal disease called C. diff that's also potentially deadly. I also had pneumonia. And all of this happened in a 4-month period of time. And my mother tripped and hit her head and died. And my girlfriend and I broke up. And as a stand up, prior to those things happening, I mainly did mostly observational comedy. But when I was going through this 4-month period of time, I decided to go on stage and talk about what I was going through. And that was one of the biggest risks at the time. And it changed my life.
Speaking about courage. So, from what I've read about you, it was 9 days after you were diagnosed, you did a show that you committed to. Is that correct?
Yeah, I never remember exactly the amount of days, but yeah, it was, I was diagnosed July 25th, and I think I did my show August 3rd, maybe something like that.
Okay, again, take us back to this risky, courageous move where you decide to still do your show after knowing that you've just been diagnosed.
It's something I wasn't sure I was going to do because I was in such a bad place physically and emotionally, as you can imagine. And and the owner of the theater, Largo in Los Angeles, I had told him everything I was going through and that I didn't think I was going to be able to do my show that was previously booked. And he told me to just keep the show on the books. And if I don't want to do it, then cancel the second before I walk on stage. But he said, maybe you'll want to perform. And I thought he must be crazy, or didn't understand what I had just shared with him. But sure enough, I kept the show on the books. And as it got closer to the date, I was thinking, oh, I actually might do this. And I started to get a little excited, but very terrified. And I would say an hour or so before the show, I was getting ready. I was taking a shower and I thought, I don't even know how to get into this material because it's not funny. Uh and then I just had this idea run through my head where I thought, what if I walk out on stage and say to the audience, to the best of my ability, with the delivery of a comedian that's saying, "Good evening, any birthdays tonight? How's everyone doing?" I wanted to go out on stage and say, "Hello, good evening. I have cancer. How are you doing?" And it made me laugh maniacally in the shower. And I thought, "Oh my gosh, I don't know if I can do that. I don't want to offend people." And then I just thought, well, I'm not making fun of people. I'm trying to make light of my own I'm trying to process my own situation.
Tig, I want to go back to when you were first diagnosed, but before we do that, I just love this moment where the shower turns into the show because you did it with a week or less than 2 weeks. You created an entire show of new material. How'd
Mhm.
you do that?
Well, I just started taking notes. Everything I would say before my cancer diagnosis, I didn't find anything amusing. I was devastated losing my mother in the middle of all of that. And I was still so far from having a sense of humor. And I think that when I got the cancer diagnosis, that broke me in a way. It just felt like too much. It felt like, are you kidding me? This couldn't. I I truly felt like saying to my doctor, but you don't understand. I'm already deathly ill. I just lost my mother, and my girlfriend and I broke up. How could I possibly have cancer? Like, I didn't understand how that could possibly be. Just start writing notes about how ridiculous everything was seeming. I mean, it was daunting and I was devastated, but it also was like, this is this can't be true. But it
It,
was.
it, you had me chuckling during that when I was listening to it, and it was when he said you have a lump on your chest or something like that. But go ahead, just that one little bit on that.
Oh, that I was saying, oh, that's my boob.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Well, you have one on your other side.
Yeah, that's my other one. I haven't, it's funny because I don't know that performance very well because it's hard for me to listen to, not because it's devastating. It's more as a comedian, it takes oftentimes years to develop a new album or stand up special. And because that was written and performed so quickly and it was released worldwide, it's not the show I would have done if I had years to perfect it.
That's the beauty of grace, Tig. That's how grace works. Grace takes you in the direction of the universe, not with exactly what you want, but look, it put all these smiles and it brought about awareness, breast cancer awareness to a degree that nothing had before that. What was the reaction of the audience?
It was all over the place. People were stunned. People were laughing nervously. Once people realized I was actually not making a joke, there were even people crying in the audience. It was a real roller coaster, start to finish.
What went through your head, Tig, to release that show as an album?
Well, I didn't have the intention to release that as an album. But the audience and the other comedians on the show, were all tweeting and blogging about the show, and it went viral, and I thought I think it was kind of in the earlier days of going viral. I didn't know what it really meant to go viral, and or the fact that people around the world knew. I was so confused. But I remember asking my manager, when do you think this is going to end, all of this hype? Because people kept saying, like, release the album. Is there any audio? And it's like, I'm not going to release that. That was the most, that was the weirdest show. Um, and it wouldn't die down. It kept happening. And so I remember friends of mine saying, you know, if you remove any fear that you might have of it not being a great show, and put aside, my perfectionism around my normal typical shows, it could maybe help other people. Um, I thought, I guess, yeah. I mean, I went through hell and back, and if I could, and I know everyone always says this kind of thing, but God, if I could help one person, and it really does mean a lot if you help just one person. And I really thought about that, and I imagined releasing the album and then going to a deserted island, and I didn't want to hear what anyone had to say about it. I didn't want to be criticized. I thought for sure the album was going to come out and people were going to say, "What's the big deal?" This, you had to be there, I guess. And I really thought it was a you had to be there show. And I just didn't believe it was an album. But I did it because a handful of friends mentioned, like, just do it. And so I did. I didn't go to a deserted island, but I was like, oh gosh, what are people saying? How is this going? And it oddly became the number one selling comedy album in the world that year. And but I don't go back and listen to it. So when you reference jokes, I have to kind of think about it, because it's not something where I go back and think, oh, I can't wait to listen to this album. It's a little cringy for me.
Tig, there's that risky, courageous little girl once again.
I guess so.
So let's go back to how, prior to being diagnosed, did you do screenings? Why did you go to the doctor?
I hadn't been screened. I had just turned 41, and I remember maybe a year before, my doctor had suggested maybe getting screened, having a mammogram, and I didn't do it when I turned 40, because I, like so many people, think, oh, I couldn't possibly have cancer. And I believed the whole idea of I'm too young. I had no reason to think. And then I noticed a lump, but when I asked around, other people were like, "Oh, I've had that, and it's just like dense, breast tissue." And I just thought, yeah, it's probably nothing. And my girlfriend, that I had been with, that I broke up with during that time, she really encouraged me to go get it checked out. And then I found it on the other side, and but I just didn't take it seriously. And it's embarrassing all these years later to think of my mindset back then.
Oh, I think it's beautiful now that you can tell others, get checked.
Yeah.
Be an advocate for yourself and just be checked.
Hmm.
Share your diagnosis with others as soon as you got it.
Did I?
Yes.
No, no. I kept it very under wraps. I remember calling my manager at the time and saying, this is happening, and please don't tell anyone. And we had made a plan to keep it under wraps, because I didn't want to keep it from, or have it keep me from working. I was very concerned that if people knew I was sick, that I wouldn't be able to work. And And so that was our plan. And then as I was inching towards that show, I thought, I feel like I want to talk about this. I didn't imagine in a million years that that show was going to go viral. I thought I was just sharing something with the 300 people in that theater. Um, I had no idea what was going to happen.
Tig, this podcast goes out specifically to cancer patients, survivors,
Hmm.
caregivers, those touched by cancer, and those who've been touched by those who've been touched by cancer. What was your diagnosis exactly?
Stage 2 breast cancer, bilateral breast cancer.
And was it diagnosis stage 2 immediately, or did you find out that afterward?
Immediate. I mean, pretty soon after. It's a little bit of a blur of when I was told stage 2. It was maybe not immediately. I think it was when I went in and met with the oncologist in person that she said it was stage 2.
What was the treatment plan?
Well, again, I had been dealing with pneumonia and C. diff, and I had been hospitalized. I'd been very weak. I lost like over 20 pounds, and it was a little hard for me to do anything other than have a double mastectomy and do tamoxifen. Um, Chemo and radiation would have just been just to be very cautious. But because I was so weak, I could barely walk across the room because I was so ill. Um, so it was a little, they wanted to see how the surgery went, and they felt like it was very successful. And they felt like tamoxifen would be a fine follow up.
And when did you start to feel like yourself again?
Well, again, it's so hard because the disease is overlapped. Um, and it wasn't for, I would say, a year, because I was dealing with so much. But as far as recovering from the surgery, a couple of months or so. I haven't really thought about that, but I would say all of the things going on, it probably took me about a year to kind of start to have a little bit more confidence. I was scared to travel. I was scared of eating. I was really in a rough spot. So again, I had cancer while I had this intestinal disease and was coming through pneumonia, and it was just a mess.
So, Tig, what would you say got you out of that rough spot?
Um, well, my friends and family, and also the support of the entertainment community, and I think that I allowed myself to step back and not rush back into life. Um, I shifted my diet. I became plant-based. Um, and I really just realized the importance of connecting with people. It's just so important.
This is a really strong message, Tig, that you're giving right now for people who have been diagnosed and undergoing treatment plans to allow people to support them. You know, that's tough to give up yourself so that you feel that you need help.
It's so hard. I mean, I remember when I got home from my surgery, and
Which surgery was this?
this was my double mastectomy. And I remember my friends one of them who I had moved out to Los Angeles with, she and her husband were saying, "We're gonna stay here with you," because I didn't have my girlfriend, I didn't have my mother anymore. I just felt a little, um, very out of sorts. But they were